talk more about the Sixers, the NBA. I feel like since 12 o'clock yesterday, 12 o'clock p.m. Eastern, it's just been a flurry of rumors and moves, and it's like all this pent-up frustration of the moratorium on all transactions is just spilling out everywhere. So to get all of that, Daryl Morey, the Sixers, and more, Bryan Toporek, co-host of the NBA podcast, also writes about the NBA and the 76ers for Forbes Sports, joins us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Bryan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Josh?
I'm doing pretty good. So let's try to get some clarity to some of the what feels like pent up, just whatever it's been for however amount of time it's been. So we've seen Giannis get Bojan Bogdanović and Drew Holiday. We know that James Harden supposedly wants out of Houston, but it was the Sixers, but now it's the Nets, and now there's a Shams report that Russell Westbrook could be traded for John Wall, and we know that Dennis Schroeder got traded to the Lakers, and that was the guy that the Milwaukee wanted. That's why they went and got Drew Holiday. Am I missing anything here?
There was a minor deal involving Bruce Brown from the Pistons, but absolutely no one cares about that. So, no, you got the big one. Oh, Robert Covington.
Oh, Covington to the Blazers. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and Chris Paul. We forgot about that. But
yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, that one was rumored since last week, so we kind of knew that one was coming. But the Drew thing in particular, it was rumored, but it came pretty much out of nowhere.
So of all the moves that have happened since 12 o'clock yesterday, what is one that either stood out to you the most, surprised you the most, or is kind of making you give like the side eye?
Yeah, well, I guess surprised me the most is the Bogdan Bogdanović one, just because in theory, if we're abiding by the free agent moratorium, like teams should not be allowed to even negotiate sign-in trades until 6 p.m. Friday. So the fact that the Bucks have already agreed to one begs the question of whether they're going to be facing a hefty fine for that. But just in general, I think the Drew Holiday move is, it's an all-in push for them. Like the Bucks gave up 3 first-round picks and 2 first-round pick swaps. All of them, they're giving up their pick this year, and then everything else is in 2024 or beyond. So it's a pretty risky move. It almost makes you think that they have to have a commitment from Giannis Antetokounmpo already, that he's going to sign the Supermax, because otherwise, Drew, he has a player option for next year. He could be a free agent next year. If Giannis doesn't sign an extension, he can be a free agent next year. So I can't imagine they gave up that much draft capital without knowing these guys are going to be here for at least a couple of years.
How much do you think also when it comes to Giannis is the fact that and I'm not saying this to be flippant, but that the Bucks understand their superstar maybe more than some other teams understand theirs. Like I feel like there is this incredible disconnect between James Harden and the Rockets, whereas it feels like the Bucks have a much better understanding of Giannis.
Yeah, and I think Giannis, he's never given the impression that he wants to leave the Bucks. Like he said that he wants to stay, he wants to win a championship in Milwaukee, and it comes off as genuinely sincere. I think the Bucks just had to look at how the last 2 playoffs have gone, especially this past year, and they had to start getting a little nervous, knowing that Miami really took it to them in the second round this year. Boston isn't going anywhere. Who knows what's going to happen with this Brooklyn stuff. Philly can always put something together as well. So, I think they're looking at the landscape and saying, if we don't at least make the finals this year, there's a real chance we lose this guy. And I think that's why they gave up as much as they did for New Orleans. Like it's a pretty clear overpay if you're evaluating it just as this is what they gave up for Drew Holiday. But if it is, from the Bucks perspective, this is what we're giving up for Drew Holiday plus guaranteeing that Giannis is going to sign the Supermax, then there's no price they wouldn't pay, because if Giannis leaves, they're not getting another player like him for, God knows how long.
Right. Last time they had a guy of Giannis's caliber was, 50 years ago with drafting Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like the Bucks franchise doesn't have superstars like this caliber come through that often.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's a small market team. They have to really put a premium, and if it means overpaying on a guy to make sure you keep your superstar, it's a risk you have to take.
How much are you buying or not buying all this fiasco around Harden? Because I feel like every hour there's a new report, the variation of another report. I don't remember if it was Zach Lowe or Brian Windhorst, but one of them came out and they said they were like, I don't even know what to believe anymore because I'm hearing so many variations of the same story.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I believe there's been enough people reporting that he wants out. I very much believe that. Enough people have reported his interest in Brooklyn that I believe that too. Whether Brooklyn has enough to make the Rockets actually trade him, that's what I'm not sure of. But I mean, as the hours and days go on, it does seem increasingly likely that James Harden could be on the Nets as early as, this weekend. I think the writing is on the wall for that Houston team where, their owner has just been so reluctant to spend what it takes to assemble a championship contender. He's tried to duck the luxury tax over the last few years. And I think if you're James Harden, knowing, we were one of the few teams that actually challenged the dynastic Golden State Warriors, and who knows, if we had one or two more depth pieces, maybe we beat them in 2018. I think that's got to wear on you after a while. So, seeing the changes they made this offseason with Daryl Morey stepping down and then later coming to Philly, Mike D'Antoni leaving, now this trade with Robert Covington. I mean, I think it's pretty clear what the ultimate move is going to be. I just don't know whether it's, do they pull the trigger now or do they wait to see if they can smooth things over at the start of the season or even until next summer? I mean, that's the one thing that's working in the Rockets' favor. They're not under immediate pressure to move him. He's under contract at least for 2 more years, and he has a giant player option, close to $47 million in 22-23. So, it's not like an Anthony Davis situation with the Pelicans where there's 1 year left and this guy's definitely going to walk. They can keep Harden this year and still have no right. They can always revisit trade talks next offseason. They're not risking losing him for nothing quite yet.
Bryan Toporek joining me here on the Boardwalk kind of hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at @BToporek. Also download the latest episode of the NBA podcast. Bryan, let's get to the Sixers. Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers both came here, in their own words, because of who's on the Sixers. Ben Simmons, Joel Embiid. So why is everybody so quick to trade one of these guys? Except for the two people whose responsibility are to trade them or not.
Hasn't that been the case for like the last 3 years? I feel like there's just been this insistence on Ben and Joel can't work together. They're definitely going to trade one at some point. Let's just do it now. So, it's no surprise, especially given Daryl's connection to James Harden. I am in no way surprised to see Ben Simmons being connected in those rumors.
So what are the Sixers' plans? Because if we take them at face value, and I don't feel like Doc and Doc Rivers and Daryl Morey are like these conniving, manipulative people. I feel like they're pretty straightforward kind of guys. So, do we take them purely at their word that their plan is to build around Ben and Joel?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is their plan for now. If the Rockets come calling and say, we're going to move James Harden, we're either going to trade him to Brooklyn or we're giving you a chance. If we'll do Ben Simmons for James Harden straight up, then I think it's something they consider. If the Rockets call and say, we want Ben Simmons, but we also want Matisse Thybulle, Shake Milton, 4 first-round picks, then I think the Sixers aren't necessarily under pressure to make that type of a blow-it-up move. Like, I really do believe that Daryl Morey and Doc Rivers would like to see how those two guys play in the system that they implement. Not to say that Brett Brown did a bad job with those guys because they were pretty successful over the last few years, but I think Doc Rivers is going to come in with his own ideas, his own rotations, his own system. And I genuinely do believe that they see these guys are under contract for a few more years. They're both in their mid-20s. Like, there's no urgency to move them yet. And, I especially wonder, after seeing what the Bucks did, seeing them go all in, whether that deters the Sixers from making a move like trading Ben Simmons for James Harden. Because even if they do that, I don't know that they're beating the Bucks next year.
Also, is there maybe a possibility that the Sixers look at the net situation and the other teams and say, yeah, you guys go out there and basically unload all of your assets to get all these players, and then if it doesn't work out in those two teams, like the Bucks and Nets, we'll be still sitting here pretty.
Right. It's very possible. I mean, Boston isn't going anywhere. That's the one concern. But yeah, I think if you see, if Harden goes to the Nets and the Bucks go all in, let those two teams duke it out next year and hope they implode at some point. And then it's probably you in Boston, maybe Miami, to take supremacy in the East.
Now, speaking of supremacy in the East, obviously the 76ers, if they're going to get there, I mentioned in the last segment, we had super high expectations for this team, and it feels like that ante has been ratcheted up because of Doc and Daryl being here. So what are realistic for the Sixers in this condensed offseason and then going into this upcoming season starting December 22nd?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Sixers Twitter has been infatuated with the idea of a Al Horford for Buddy Hield trade since February, I feel like. I wonder if Bogdan Bogdanovic being traded from Sacramento, if that affects the Kings' willingness to trade Buddy Hield, because it seemed like it was a one or the other type thing, and it seems like they've chosen Hield over Bogdan. So I've never been sold on that framework. I've always wondered why the Kings say yes in general, but now I'm especially skeptical of that. So, honestly, it would not shock me if the Sixers don't make a ton of big moves this offseason. I know it's not what Sixers fans want to hear, and, I could be totally wrong. I never want to count out Daryl Morey, to say the least, but, I think the same thing that applies with Ben and Joe might apply to the whole roster, where they want to see, can we figure out a way to better maximize Tobias Harris? Are there ways that we can get more out of Al Horford than we did last year? Josh Richardson is the one guy who I could see them moving on from, just because he's going to be a free agent next offseason, and I don't think they, frankly, plan on spending the money to retain him. So if they can get someone else, a better fitting piece in his place, maybe a point guard. I saw, I think Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer mentioned a Josh Richardson for Patty Mills as a possibility. So that wouldn't shock me. Otherwise, they're limited to the taxpayer mid-level exception, which is about $5.7 million. I think they're just going to be looking for more shooters and ball handlers. And then, they have minimum contracts too. So, DJ Augustine, I feel like, is one of their best bets. Jeff Teague, Wes Matthews, if he's not going to stay with Milwaukee, could be interesting. Avery Bradley, Austin Rivers, especially given his relationship with Doc, but also Morey. I wouldn't be shocked to see him come on a min deal. But, they're pretty limited because of how much money they gave out last summer to Alan Tobias.
Now, tomorrow night, we have the NBA draft. Folks can hear right here on 97.3 ESPN. The Sixers don't just have a pick in the 20s, they also have a bunch of picks in the second round. So, knowing what you know about Daryl Morey, what do you expect to happen tomorrow night?
I think it is safe to say they will not be making all 5 picks. I can almost guarantee that. Whether they use some of those picks to trade up, whether they trade some of those seconds for future picks, I don't know. They could use some of them on draft and stash guys or on two-way players, which I think would be smart. The only thing I don't want them to do is sell picks for cash, although I can almost guarantee that they're going to sell at least one of them just because of how far over the luxury tax threshold they are. The draft is their opportunity to add cheap talent, which they very badly need because of how much money they owe to Joel, Ben, Al, Tobias. And we saw with a guy like Shake Milton how valuable it can be to hit on one of these picks. The odds, the hit rate is not great on second round picks. Like, chances are you're probably not going to get much more than a rotation player. But when you do, that player is worth his weight in gold, especially considering how much money you owe to these other guys. So I would like to see the Sixers take as many swings with the bat as they can. But yeah, I think They're going to trade at least one. And again, I think they mostly look at shooters, wings, ball handlers. I doubt they put too much of a premium on bigs in the draft.
Now, with that being said, I've heard a lot of names this week for the Sixers. You know, I think I've been sold on Tyrell Terry of Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot of Cole Anthony. People are conflicted on that one. I've heard some Malachi Flynn. I've heard a lot of different names. Isaiah Joe, I know that report's out there right now that apparently he was promised the Sixers will draft him somewhere along the draft. So is there a prospect that you think makes the most sense?
Yeah, I mean, all three of those guys I think would be good fits. Desmond Bane is one of my favorites. He's just an absolute elite shooter. Grant Riller, too, out of Charleston. I think he's probably going to be more of a second-round guy, which is fine. I mean, they have 34 and 36, so they could easily grab him if he falls there. Devon Dodson's another guy, Kansas guard, with one of their second-round picks possibly. You know, I think they're going to have a lot of options. Like, this draft is not very top-heavy, so it's, you know, if you're Minnesota with the number one pick, that's why you're trying to look to trade down, or Golden State with the number two pick. But this draft does seem to have a lot of depth, a lot of possible rotation players. So having 21, 34, 36 in particular, you know, there's a chance that the Sixers actually find one or two guys who can genuinely contribute.
Now, you said this draft has a lot of depth, but the one thing I've heard also is that, and I'm no NBA draft expert, but the thing the experts are saying is that there is no guaranteed superstar in this draft, at least near the top. So between the big names at the top, you know, you have Anthony Edwards, you have James Wiseman, you have LaMelo Ball. Do you have a guy that you like the most out of those three?
I would lean LaMelo, but like you, I'm not pouring over hours of draft tape. So this is a very lukewarm take, and it's, you know, we had Jonathan Wasserman of Bleacher Report on our podcast a few weeks ago to do a draft preview. He very much scared me off of Wiseman. He said he's got Wiseman, you know, closer to the bottom half of his top 10 than the top three. So that makes me nervous. And then Anthony Edwards sounds like he has the prototypical frame for a two guard, but there are some questions just about his mindset and motivation, like some Andrew Wiggins vibes. So it might be LaMelo just by process of elimination more than I think this guy is definitely, you know, MVP potential or multiple All-Stars. I think he's probably just the safest of the three.
And the other thing is also because of the teams that are at the top, you know, Minnesota 1, the Warriors 2, obviously the destination has a lot to do with this too, right? Like, for example, I think a lot of people are, if you're not a Warriors hater, you're salivating over the idea of James Wiseman going to the Warriors, whereas there are some people who are saying should it be Edwards going to Minnesota because he's more of an off guard than LaMelo Ball would be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's also why Minnesota is reportedly trying to trade down. Like, there was a rumor of Charlotte really liking Wiseman, and the Warriors have been connected to Wiseman for a while, so Charlotte would have to jump over them. And I think the Timberwolves would probably like nothing more than to not have to make that decision and just let whoever falls to them, they can take that guy and pick up another asset as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to the drama. Folks can hear it all here on 97.3 ESPN tomorrow night. I know you and Morton Jensen will have a lot to talk about all week long and the next couple of weeks on the NBA podcast. Folks can catch that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. And make sure you follow Bryan on Twitter for all of your NBA and Sixers coverage at B Toporek on Twitter. As all guests, he appeared on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Bryan, always appreciate the time.
Absolutely, Josh. Happy to come on anytime. Thanks for having me.